The morning smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. I remember that clearly. The weight of it. That thick, copper-gray pressure sitting on the city like a held breath. I was running late for the third time that week, cutting through Ryland Market with a coffee in one hand and my jacket half on, weaving through the stalls the way you do when the city belongs to you and you belong to it, and nothing about that is worth thinking about. That was the thing about Mira City. You stopped noticing it. You stopped noticing each other. His name was Casper Vels. I didn't know that then. He was just a man standing at the wrong end of the fruit stall, wearing a coat that was 2 seasons too heavy for early September, holding a canvas bag against his chest like something inside it might escape. He was maybe 60, gray-stubbled, eyes the color of old river water, not brown, not green, just the turbid in-between of something that had been moving for a long time. He wasn't looking at the fruit. He was watching the intersection. I wouldn't have stopped. I almost didn't. But he said without turning to face me, "You should fill your bathtub tonight." I stopped. The way you stop when something cuts against the grain of everything around it. Not threatening, not loud, just wrong in a way that demands attention. "Sorry?" I said. He turned then, unhurried. The way old men turn when they've stopped being in a hurry for anything. "Fill your bathtub. Stock what food you have. Don't make plans to leave the city tomorrow." A pause. His jaw worked. Or make them. But don't count on following through. There was nothing erratic about him. No trembling. No flicker of the unhinged. He was calm the way people are calm when they've moved through panic so many times, it's become a room they simply live in. "What's happening tomorrow?" I asked. "I don't know the exact hour," he said. "I never do, but I've seen it before. Not here. Different city. The pattern starts the same. The bite reports come in as animal attacks. The hospitals start diverting. The police scanner goes quiet for 20 minutes at a time, and that quiet is worse than anything they'd say." He looked at the intersection again. A bus rolled through. A woman laughed into her phone. 2 kids fought over a paper bag of something sweet. It spreads from the water treatment infrastructure outward. Edge districts first, then it folds inward. I was nodding the way you nod when you're waiting for someone to finish so you can leave politely. "You don't believe me," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was arithmetic. "I think you've had a rough time," I said. "I think whatever you saw somewhere else was genuinely awful, and I'm sorry." He nodded slowly. "What's your name?" "Dara." "Dara." He said it like he was filing it. "I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to treat it like a fire drill. You don't believe your building is burning when you do a fire drill. You just do the steps." He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. Neat handwriting. A list. Water. Non-perishables. A hand-crank radio if I had one. First aid kit check. Cash on hand. Candles. 1 bag packed. If nothing happens, you throw that away, and I'm just a stranger who interrupted your morning. He shrugged. "I've been that stranger a lot." I took the list. I don't know why. Maybe because his hands didn't shake. Maybe because the list was organized with the specificity of someone who had learned through loss exactly what you need and exactly what you think you need, and why those 2 things are never the same. I watched him walk away into the crowd. I put the list in my jacket pocket. I was late. I had a 9 o'clock. I had a full day scheduled and an inbox that needed clearing. And a lunch meeting I'd already pushed twice. I had a life that was moving in 4 directions at once and had no use for cryptic old men at fruit stalls. I did not fill my bathtub that night. I would spend the next 72 hours wishing I had. My apartment was on the 6th floor of a building called the Arlen, which had a name that suggested elegance and a structure that suggested the 1980s had made a lot of decisions, and none of them well. The hallway always smelled faintly of fried onions. The elevator required a specific technique. Press the button, release, press again. Like a prayer that only worked if you did it right. I'd lived there 4 years. I knew every creak in the floorboards. I knew which neighbor played piano at 11 and which one left their bike in the stairwell on Tuesdays. I knew the building the way you know a place you've stopped looking at. Her name was Joss Mireille, and she lived across the hall in 6B. We'd developed the kind of friendship that thrives in hallways. Warm, functional, bounded. She knocked on my door that evening around 7, holding a bowl of leftover curry and a bottle of wine by the neck, which was her universal gesture for I've had a day that requires witnesses. "Come in," I said, moving aside. She dropped onto my couch with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it many times and said, "The system at work crashed for the 3rd time this month. I'm starting to think the IT guy is doing it on purpose. He's the only one who looks calm when it happens." I laughed. I was standing at my kitchen counter, putting away dishes, half listening, half still turning the day over in my mind. The man at the market, the list still in my jacket pocket. I hadn't thrown it away. I hadn't done anything with it either. "You're somewhere else," Joss said. "I met a strange man this morning," I said. "How strange?" "He told me something bad was going to happen tomorrow. Gave me a list." I retrieved it from my jacket on the back of the chair and handed it to her. Joss studied it. Her expression shifted through several small phases. Amusement, then something more attentive, then a frown that wasn't dismissal so much as processing. "He just handed this to you. Walked up to me at Ryland Market, very calm, very specific. Said he'd seen something like it before. Different city. That's either a very sad man with a trauma history," Joss said, handing it back, "or a very sad man with a trauma history who happens to be right. Either way, sad man with a trauma history." "Sure." She poured wine into my spare glass without asking, which was fine. "But the list isn't unreasonable. It's basically emergency preparedness. My mom keeps 2 weeks of supplies because she grew up in a flood zone. Normal people do this. Normal people don't walk up to strangers at markets and tell them the city is going to collapse." "No," Joss agreed. "But also, cities do collapse. Sometimes." We ate her curry. We talked about other things. A film she wanted to see, the situation with her sister, whether we were both quietly aware that our lives had entered a phase that felt transitional in ways we couldn't quite name. The wine made the evening softer. The man at the market receded. By 9:30, I felt silly for even mentioning it. The way you feel silly when you tell someone about a nightmare in the daylight. I walked Joss to the door, and she paused in the hallway with the empty bowl under one arm. "You should at least fill the bathtub," she said. "It doesn't cost anything. You just said he was a sad man with a trauma history. He is. And he might also be right. Those two things can coexist." She tapped the doorframe twice, her equivalent of a farewell, and disappeared into 6B. I stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then I went to the bathroom and turned on the tap. The bathtub filled slowly. I stood there, listening to the water, feeling faintly ridiculous. The city noise drifted up from below. Car horns, someone's music, the specific low hum of 10,000 people going about lives they had no reason to question. I turned off the tap when it was full. I went to bed at 11. I lay there watching the ceiling. At 2:47 a.m., I heard the first siren. 3 sirens, actually. Then a fourth, spaced apart in a way that felt wrong. Not the clustered overlap of a single incident, but independent dispatch. Multiple locations, the city beginning to talk to itself in a register it didn't normally use. I sat up. My phone showed no notifications. The time was 2:51. I lay back down. Sirens in cities are white noise. They mean nothing most of the time. I told myself this and believed it for approximately 4 minutes before the sound changed. Not more sirens, but something else. Something underneath. A low, irregular scattering noise that I would later identify as the sound of people running in the street below, which is a sound that looks nothing like the sound of people walking or jogging, a sound with a different texture entirely, fractured and urgent. I went to the window. 3 floors down and half a block north, a man was running. Then a woman. Then a group, all moving in the same direction, some looking back. Under the streetlight, I couldn't read their faces clearly, but their bodies were speaking a language that didn't require translation. They were not running toward anything. At the far end of the block, something moved differently from the humans. Slow, irregular, stumbling, persistent. And I told myself it was a drunk person, which was the explanation available to me at that moment, which was the last innocent explanation I would reach for a very long time. I called Joss. 4 rings, 5. Then her voice, foggy with sleep. What? Look out your window. Silence. Then the sound of movement, fabric. Then, Dara. I know. What is that? I don't know yet. There are. There's a lot of people. Why are they? A pause, then lower. Dara. One of them is not moving right. I know, I said again. We stayed on the phone. The sirens had multiplied again. 6 now, at least, from different directions, all of them moving, all of them failing to converge. Whatever this was, it was happening in more than one place, and that meant it was not a single incident to be managed. That meant something had already gotten past the point of containment. My hand found the list on my nightstand. I hadn't put it there. Then I remembered I had. Taken it from my jacket pocket before bed, set it down on the table beside my water glass, not quite believing and not quite dismissing. Casper Vels, the man with the river water eyes who had stood at the fruit stall and watched the intersection like he was waiting for confirmation. I'd gotten confirmation. We need to move, I said. Move where? Joss asked. It was the right question, the one I hadn't answered in any of the hours between the market and this moment. Not out of the building, not yet. I was already moving, pulling clothes on, opening my closet, pulling down the bag I kept on the top shelf with camping gear from 2 years ago, half packed already by accident. Come to my apartment. Bring what you can carry. First aid if you have it. Any food that doesn't need cooking. This is actually happening, she said. It was not a question. Come to my door. Now. I hung up and started moving through my apartment with a clarity I didn't know I possessed. The bathtub, full. I found containers, pots, bottles, a water filter jug, and filled them from the tap before the water pressure could change, before anything could be cut. I pulled the emergency radio from the camping bag and tested it. Static, then a voice, clipped and wrong in its cadence. Not the smooth modulation of a broadcast professional, but someone speaking into a microphone for the first time in an emergency. Reading from a script they'd never expected to use. Reports of multiple disturbances across Districts 4, 7, and 11. Residents advised to remain indoors, advised not to approach affected individuals. Emergency services were responding to. The broadcast cut. Static. I held the radio. Joss knocked twice. Fast, the way she knocked when something was wrong. I opened the door, and her face told me she'd seen more from her window than I had from mine. She was carrying her bag, and a look I'd never seen on her before. Not panic, not yet, but the controlled precursor to it. The face people wear when they've decided that composure is the only useful thing left. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I said. We shut the door behind us, and the night became something else entirely. By 4 a.m., the building had started to wake itself up. Not all at once. Not like a fire alarm, not orderly. It was incremental. Doors opening, voices in the hall asking questions of each other across the threshold, the way people ask when they're seeking permission to be afraid. I could hear Mrs. Tennell in 6D talking to her son on the phone, her voice cycling through the specific cadence of an older person being told something they don't want to believe. But the news isn't saying. I don't. Well, why aren't they saying that? Joss and I had dragged my kitchen table against my front door. It wasn't a real barricade. We both knew that. But the act of moving it had given us something to do with our hands, while our minds caught up with the night. We'd inventoried what we had. 6 days of food if we rationed, 20 liters of water, 1 first aid kit, 1 hand crank radio, 2 phones at 80% battery, 1 pocket knife, 1 small fire extinguisher I'd bought for the kitchen and never thought about since. "Weapons," Joss said. It was the first time she'd said it, and I heard the weight of the word settling in the room. "I have the knife," I said. "That's it?" "I have a hammer in the toolbox under the sink." "Okay." She nodded. "Okay, that's something." I found the hammer and set it on the counter where we could both see it. There's a psychology to visible tools in a crisis. The mind needs to see the options arranged in front of it. I'd read that somewhere and hadn't thought it would ever be relevant. Most things you don't think will be relevant are exactly that until they are. The radio cycled through static and fragments. At 4:20, it resolved briefly into a clearer signal, a civil emergency channel, robotic comm, reading coordinates and district numbers. Districts 4 and 7 were listed as active containment zones. District 11 had been. The word used was reclassified, which was a bureaucratic evasion for something that did not have a polite word yet. My building was in District 9. Not listed, not safe, just not yet listed. "We need more people," Joss said. "What do you mean?" 2 people alone in a 6th-floor apartment is fine until it isn't. More people means more capability, more watch rotations, more problem solving. She was thinking clearly in a way I found both reassuring and faintly frightening, like she had a previously undiscovered gear. "Who else is on this floor?" I ran through them. Mrs. Tennell in 6D, 60-something, bad knee. The Parcell brothers in 6A. Theo and Marcus, 20s, students. The woman in 6C, whose name I'd never actually learned, which I now felt ashamed of. The piano player at the end of the hall, 6F. A man named Odin, who I knew mostly as sound and silhouette. "We start with Theo and Marcus," Joss said. Young, able-bodied, probably also lying awake scrolling their phones trying to figure out what's happening. She was right. I knocked on 6A at 4:35. Marcus answered in 3 seconds, which meant he hadn't been sleeping. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a university sweatshirt, eyes active and sharp. Behind him, Theo. Smaller, quicker, the kind of person whose stillness is itself a form of motion. "You've heard," I said. "We've been listening to the scanner app," Marcus said. "What do you know?" "Enough," I said. "Come in." We had a meeting at my kitchen table with the hammer visible and the radio between us and the night outside the window, doing things we were choosing not to watch. I told them everything. Casper Vels, the market, the list, the bathtub. I watched Marcus and Theo absorb it and process it and arrive at their own conclusions with the speed of people who'd grown up in a world where institutional trust was already threadbare. "A stranger warned you," Theo said, not skeptically. "Just locating the detail." "Yes." "And you did some of what he said." "Not enough of it." Marcus looked at Joss. "You're the organized one." "Apparently," she said. "Tell us what to do," he said, with the directness of someone who had decided that directness was now the only viable currency. "Just tell us. We'll do it." The woman in 6C was named Fallon Marsh. I learned this at 5 a.m. when she knocked on my door herself, which told me something important about her. She'd assessed the situation independently and made a decision about where the gravity center of the floor was. She was maybe 35, compact and deliberate in the way she moved. A single bag on her shoulder, already packed the way someone packs when they've thought about leaving before the emergency told them to. "I have a car in the parking structure," she said, standing in my doorway, looking at the four of us assembled at the table. "Where would you go?" Marcus asked. "My sister's place, outside the city. District 15, rural edge." "The roads," Theo started, "are probably becoming a problem," Fallon said. "I know. I'm not leaving now. I'm telling you, the option exists." She set her bag down. "What I'm asking is whether this is a group that's thinking clearly." We looked at each other. Joss answered for us. "We're trying to be." Fallon nodded once and came inside. 6 people. It sounds like a small number unless you've spent time thinking about how many variables 6 people can cover. Watch rotations, foraging, communication, physical defense, decision-making, morale. 6 is a unit. 2 is exposure. The difference is not arithmetic. By 5:30, the building had produced its own crisis. 3 floors down, in 3B, someone had been bitten. We found this out because the person's roommate came up the stairwell, not the elevator. People had stopped using the elevator by instinct, already hammering on random doors asking for help, asking if anyone was a doctor, asking with the specific desperation of someone who doesn't yet understand that the word doctor has stopped solving anything. His name was Reed. 20-something, dark-haired, shaking. His roommate was named Cal. Cal had been bitten. Marcus took Reed into the hallway while the rest of us stood in a cluster inside my apartment, the door half open, and the conversation that happened next was the first one we'd have where we were genuinely operating in the new logic of whatever this was. Because the question was not how to help Cal. The question was whether Cal needed to be kept away from the rest of us, and what that meant, and who was going to say it. Joss said it. "He can't come up here." Reed looked at her through the doorway. His face restructured itself around something that might have been anger, and might have been grief, and was probably both. "He's my best friend." "I understand," Joss said. "How long ago was the bite?" "Maybe 40 minutes." "Is he symptomatic?" A pause that was its own answer. "Reed," Fallon said gently, "is he showing signs?" He's saying he's cold. He keeps saying he's cold, and he..." Reed stopped. "His hands." I didn't ask what was happening to his hands. The radio had told us enough. The broadcast from before the cut had said, "Do not approach symptomatic individuals," and the word symptomatic had been the only one that mattered. "Is he alone down there?" I asked. "I locked him in the bathroom," Reed said. His voice broke on it. Not all the way, just a fracture, like stone. I didn't know what else. "That was the right thing," Marcus said. "That was exactly the right thing." "I can't leave him." "You're not leaving him," Marcus said. "You're up here. He's down there." "That's not abandonment." He put his hand on Reed's shoulder. "Come inside. We need everyone we can get." Reed came in. He sat in the corner by the window. He didn't speak for a long time. He was carrying the weight of a decision he hadn't made, but had enacted. And those are the heaviest kinds. I brought him water. He held the glass with both hands and looked at the floor, and I understood, watching him, that survival was not going to be clean, that we were already past the point where it could be, that the cost was going to be paid in a currency none of us had agreed to carry. Outside, the city began to sound different. Dawn came the way dawn comes in a crisis, without permission, without the normalcy you expected daylight to restore. The sky went from black to gray to a flat, overcast white that pressed down on the city and made everything visible without making anything clear. From my window, I could now see the street properly. I wished, briefly, that I couldn't. The people moving below were a mix, some fleeing, some frozen, some moving with the unmistakable wrongness that I no longer had the comfort of calling something else. A vehicle had jackknifed at the intersection, and nobody had moved it. 2 cars had been abandoned in the middle of the road. A fire burned somewhere out of sight, producing a column of brown smoke that leaned southeast. District 9 is being listed now, Theo said from the radio. He'd taken over monitoring it, written notes on the back of a receipt. Still not a containment zone, just listed as active. What does active mean? Reed asked. He'd rejoined the group after an hour of silence, had moved closer to the table, had begun to participate in small ways, refilling water containers, helping Theo track the radio shifts. Grief had reorganized itself into function, the way it sometimes does when staying still is unbearable. It means they know something is happening here, Fallon said. It doesn't mean they're coming. Are they coming? Marcus asked. Fallon looked at him steadily. No institutional response I've ever seen in a situation like this has arrived in time. They respond to where it already was, not where it's going. You've seen a situation like this before? Theo asked. Nothing like this, she said. But emergencies have shapes. They look different and they behave the same. She was the one who'd been thinking about leaving. And she was also the one who decided not to yet. And that calculation told you everything you needed to know about her. The morning's first direct threat came at 7:40. A man from a lower floor. I never learned his name, never wanted to, which was a mercy I allowed myself, had come up to the 6th floor. Not by the stairs, by the elevator. Later, we'd understand that in his state, the elevator presented no obstacle. The simple mechanics of call button and door were still apparently within reach. He came out of the elevator bank and down the hall and struck the door to 6F before we were fully aware of the threat. Odin, the piano player, who had joined us at 6 and who turned out to be a 30-year-old architect with a calm, methodical mind and arms that had spent years moving heavy furniture for side income, was the one who engaged first. He had the fire extinguisher from the hallway. He used it. It was not violent in the way violence is in films. It was messy and desperate and functionally necessary, and it left all of us changed in small but permanent ways. We blocked the stairwell door at the 6th floor with Fallon's car Jack, which she'd retrieved from her vehicle at first light, and a length of pipe Marcus had found in the maintenance closet. It would hold until it didn't. We were operating on a logic of hours now, not days. We need to have the conversation, Fallon said. And everyone knew which conversation she meant. The car, she confirmed. Leaving the building meant the street. The street was District 9 active. But staying in the building meant a sealed environment with a finite resource clock. Food, water, and the structural integrity of our blockades all ticking down simultaneously. The calculation wasn't safe either way. It was a comparison of diminishing probabilities. 6 people in 1 car, Theo said. It's a large SUV, Fallon said. It fits 6 if we're not comfortable about it. District 15, Joss said. How far? 40 minutes in normal conditions. These aren't normal conditions, Reed said quietly. No, Fallon agreed. They're not. Which is why we decide now, while we still have the daylight and the initiative, instead of waiting until someone else's timeline forces our hand. We went silent in the particular way that a group goes silent when a decision is being weighed, not just logically, but in the gut, which is where decisions like this actually live. Marcus was the first to speak. I think we go. We didn't leave immediately. The decision and the departure are separated by a gap that people who haven't been in survival situations don't fully understand. The gap where you discover how many small things have to happen between choosing and acting, and how each one is its own negotiation with fear. Odin mapped the route on paper. Phone maps worked intermittently, networks saturating under demand, and we weren't willing to bet the drive on a data connection. He drew it from memory. He knew the city architecturally, in terms of arterials and grids, and he marked 3 alternate routes for 3 possible failure scenarios. Fallon briefed us on the car. Full tank, she'd filled it 2 weeks ago, hadn't driven much since. The parking structure was accessible from the building's interior through a door on the ground floor, a detail that mattered enormously, because it meant we could reach the vehicle without first going into the street. Ground floor is the problem, Marcus said. We don't know what's on the ground floor. We know the building had 63 units, Joss said. We know maybe 4 or 5 units on this floor are accounted for. That leaves a lot of variables. We go as a unit, I said. Together on the stairs. Odin and Marcus in front, Fallon with the keys already out, everyone else between. We don't stop for anything we can't identify as worth stopping for. Reed looked at me. What's worth stopping for? It was a question I didn't want to answer directly, so I answered it obliquely. If someone is mobile and clearly uninfected and needs help getting out, we make space. We don't stop for threats. We don't engage. We move through. He understood. He'd already done the most painful version of that math, down on the 3rd floor at 5 a.m. He nodded. We left at 9:15. The stairwell was dim. Emergency lighting only. Green cast, cold. The building's normal sounds had been replaced by something ambient and uncomfortable. A low background register of things we were choosing not to name. At the 3rd floor, Reed kept his eyes ahead. I watched him do it and felt what that cost him. We passed the 2nd floor landing, and I smelled smoke. Not external smoke from the burning district blocks, but close-up smoke, contained. Something burning inside the building that hadn't been burning an hour ago. Faster, Fallon said, not loudly, just directed. Ground floor. The door from the stairwell into the lobby was ajar. Marcus put his hand flat against it and listened for 4 seconds, which is longer than 4-second sounds in the dark with smoke behind you. Then he pushed through. The lobby was not clear. It had 2 of them, one near the mailboxes, one near the entrance doors. Neither was between us and the internal parking door. The one near the entrance doors turned toward us when we came through. But Odin had the fire extinguisher and Marcus had the hammer, and they moved with the coordinated efficiency of people who had silently rehearsed this by running the scenario in their heads for the past 2 hours. We crossed the lobby in 11 seconds. I counted. The parking structure door closed behind us. Fallon had the car running before we were all seated. The SUV's interior lights came on, and for a second the 6 of us looked at each other in that interior brightness. Reed's face, Theo's face, Odin's face, Joss and Marcus and Fallon. And what I saw there was not heroism, was not the clean resolution of a survival story. but something rawer. The mutual recognition of people who had crossed a threshold and could not go back through it, who were operating in a world they'd entered without a map and were building the map as they moved. Route 1, Odin said from the back, paper in hand. Fallon backed out. The shutter at the parking structure exit lifted on her remote. Daylight poured in. The street was what the street was. Fallon drove into it. The first 4 blocks were the kind of driving that carves grooves into you. Fallon had both hands on the wheel and her jaw set, and she drove the way people drive when they've converted terror into technique, controlled, deliberate, reading the road ahead with the predatory attentiveness of someone who understood that the choice of lane and the choice of speed were not comfort preferences, but survival decisions. Odin called the route from the back. Marcus watched the right side. I watched the left. Joss and Reed were behind us, quiet, managing the specific interior discipline of people whose jobs in this moment were to not interfere with the people whose jobs were something else. Mira City on a normal Tuesday looked like a city that believed in itself. Commuters, school children, the rhythmic commerce of a population going about its business with the low-grade arrogance of people who have never had to question the infrastructure beneath them. Mira City on this morning looked like the question that arises when that infrastructure answers. At the first intersection on Odin's route, a bus had stopped diagonally across the lane. Not wrecked. Stopped. Engine off. Door open. Nobody in it. Fallon went around it onto the opposite sidewalk, which was passable. And nobody said anything because there was nothing to say. At the second block, a group of people was moving in the same direction we were traveling, on foot, which created the specific problem of a vehicle overtaking pedestrians in a state of crisis. They could hear us, they could react to us, and their reactions were unpredictable. Fallon threaded through them at walking pace, and they parted, and we watched them. And they watched us with the same careful mutual assessment. Are you a threat? Are you help? Are you just another variable in a landscape of variables? Turn coming, Odin said. Left on Velen, then straight for about a mile. Velen was the mistake. Not immediately. The first 300 meters were clear enough. Abandoned cars, but passable lanes. Then we came over a gentle rise and saw what was ahead, and Fallon said to no, quietly, and stopped. The road was not blocked. The road was occupied. A large group, 30, maybe 40, had concentrated at the junction ahead, and within it the infected and the uninfected were intermixed in the worst possible configuration, close enough that you could not navigate through without resolution, numerous enough that speed would kill the wrong people. Alternate route, Marcus said. Route 2, Odin said, already tracing the paper. Back 2 blocks, right on Causal, south on the bypass. Fallon reversed. She did it smoothly. I turned and watched the junction behind us as we backed away from it, and nothing followed us, not immediately. And that small fact was its own mercy. Causal Street was quieter. The bypass was quieter still. A service road that ran behind the commercial district, built for delivery trucks, wide and straight and largely empty. Fallon exhaled for the first time in 8 minutes. Good, Odin said. This takes us to the bridge approach. Should be. The radio Theo was holding. He'd brought it, tucked under the seat, resolved suddenly into a clear broadcast. A different voice than before, a woman's, official and restrained. Emergency broadcast update for Districts 7 through 12. The Causal Bypass and Bridge 4 approach are currently designated restricted. Civilian traffic is advised not. The broadcast cut again. The bridge, Marcus said. Restricted means military or police presence, Fallon said. That's not necessarily bad for us. It's also not necessarily good, Theo said. All we know is we can't go back, Joss said. There was something about the way she said it. Not defiant, not resigned, just factual. The voice of someone who had located the only truth that mattered in that moment. That settled us. We couldn't go back. Not because the road was blocked, but because back was the building with the smoke and the stairwell and the lobby, was the city deepening into itself, was a direction that diminished every hour we let it pass. Forward was the bridge. We went toward it. The Bridge 4 approach was guarded by two men in civilian clothing with red armbands and the specific posture of people who had been given authority recently and were still calibrating its weight. Not military, not police. A volunteer checkpoint, the kind that appears in the gaps between institutional response and institutional collapse, improvised and genuine and deeply uncertain of its own jurisdiction. One of them held up a hand as Fallon slowed. The others stood back, watching the car with the lateral attentiveness of someone who'd been trained to assess threat from a distance. Fallon rolled down her window. "How many in the vehicle?" the nearer one asked. He was maybe 40, thick-armed, a former something. The way he held himself communicated a physical history without specifying it. 6, Fallon said. "Any infected? Any symptomatic?" "No." "Anyone been bitten or scratched in the last 12 hours?" Fallon looked in the rear view. 6 pairs of eyes met hers. 6 headshakes. "No," she said. He studied her. Then he stepped back and spoke quietly to the other man. "I watched them negotiate something. Not what to do with us, I thought, but something else. Something about the bridge itself, about what was on the other side of it, or what had changed in the last hour." The first man came back. "Bridge is passable. There's a processing point on the far side. You'll need to stop there." A pause. "Stay on the marked lane. Don't stop in the middle of the span." "Why not?" Theo asked from the back. The man looked past Fallon to find the source of the question. "Because the bridge is one lane now. If you stop, you block what's behind you." He held Theo's gaze a beat longer than necessary. "And you don't want to be stopped on the bridge." We drove onto Bridge 4. It was a long bridge. 400 meters of suspension over the Ryle River, which on any other day was a backdrop you photographed when the light hit it right. Gray-brown and slow-moving and absolutely indifferent. Today the river was the same. Rivers don't change for emergencies. They were old before the city and would be here after it. And looking down at the water as we crossed, I felt the perspective shift that happens sometimes in extremis. The sudden vertiginous awareness of scale, of how small the bridge was, of how small the car was, of how small the 6 of us were in the arithmetic of whatever this thing was. The marked lane was a row of orange cones. We followed them. From the bridge, looking back, the city was visible in a way it normally wasn't from ground level. The column of smoke I'd seen from my window was now 3 columns, distinct and converging. The skyline was unchanged, same buildings, same skyline geometry, but inhabited differently, lit differently in the flat morning light, carrying a different weight. I had lived there for 11 years. The Arlen, the market where Casper Vels had handed me a list, the coffee I'd been holding, the way the city had belonged to me and I had belonged to it. Joss was looking back too. "You're memorizing it," I said quietly. "I think so," she said. The processing point on the far side of the bridge was a tent structure with 2 folding tables and 4 more people in red armbands, and a woman in an actual emergency services vest who was clearly running the operation and clearly running it on about 4 hours of sleep and 3 cups of coffee. She came to Fallon's window before we'd fully stopped. 6, Fallon said before being asked. Any symptoms, bites, scratches? No. Where are you headed? District 15, my sister's property. The woman made a note. Route 7 out of here is clear as of 40 minutes ago. We haven't had a traffic update since. She looked at all of us. You've got about 90 minutes of road before things get uncertain again. Move fast. Don't stop for things that aren't yours. She stepped back. Go. We went. The city behind us, the road ahead. The gap between them was everything. Route 7 in normal conditions is the kind of road that makes you understand why people have complicated feelings about leaving cities. That moment when the density thins and the horizon opens, and suddenly you can see sky in all directions instead of just straight up between buildings. And something in the chest does an involuntary thing that might be relief and might be grief. Today, Route 7 was not that. Today it was a road that got lonelier the further we went, and lonelier in a way that felt curated rather than natural, like the world was pulling back from something. We passed 3 abandoned vehicles in the first 20 minutes. We passed a farmhouse with its lights on, and its shutters closed and nothing moving outside it. We passed a gas station that had been emptied, not looted from what we could see, just cleared. The pump still standing, but the forecourt vacant, and the convenience store dark behind its windows. At the 40-minute mark, we passed a truck parked on the shoulder, with an older man sitting on its running board, watching us go. He didn't wave. He didn't flag us down. He just watched, with the expression of someone who had decided their road ended there. Marcus wanted to stop for him. He's not flagging us, Fallon said. He might not know he can ask. We're not built for stops right now, she said, and her voice carried the particular firmness of someone enforcing a rule they don't enjoy enforcing, that protects more than it costs, but not without costing. If we stop for one person who's fine, we stop for the next person who isn't. Marcus said nothing. He looked back at the man until a curve in the road took him from view. The debate didn't end there. It just became internal, each of us running our own version of the calculus. Survival requires categories that ordinary life doesn't ask you to create. It requires you to sort the world into what you can carry and what you can't. And the sorting doesn't care how you feel about it. The man on the running board was in the category of things we couldn't carry. I didn't know if I'd make the same decision tomorrow. I knew I'd make it again today. We drove. At the 65-minute mark, Odin said, I know this stretch. We're about 15 minutes out from the District 15 boundary. Something changed in the car. Not audible, just barometric. A shift in the collective tension. Joss reached over and put her hand over mine on the armrest without looking at me. Reed behind us sat slightly straighter. Even the road seemed to change. Wider shoulders, older trees, the quality of light through the windshield shifting as we moved further from the orbital city grid. Then Fallon said, "Hold on," and braked. The road ahead was not blocked. There was a single figure in the road, standing still, not moving with the wrong kind of motion, not approaching, just standing. Coat too heavy for September, canvas bag against his chest. I knew before I saw his face. "Pull over," I said. Fallon looked at me. "Pull over," I said again. She stopped the car 30 meters from him. I got out. The air out here was different, colder, cleaner, carrying the smell of turned earth and wet grass. I walked toward him, and Casper Vels watched me come with those river water eyes that did not register surprise. "You got out," he said. "You're here," I said. "I told you which way it would move." He nodded back toward the city. The smoke columns were visible even from here, faint and dark against the sky. Edge districts first, then folding inward, I made it out ahead of the fold. How did you know? I said. And I meant all of it. The market, the list, the hours, the exact shape of the warning he'd given a stranger. He was quiet a moment. The last city, he said. I was too late there. I've been trying to be early enough ever since. He looked at the car. You have room? I looked back at Fallon. She was already leaning across to open the passenger door. Fallon's sister was named Petra, and she had prepared. Not in the way Casper had prepared, not with the specific foreknowledge of recurring pattern, but in the way of someone who had spent years watching the world from a rural distance and maintaining a quiet skepticism about the stability of systems she'd never been close enough to trust implicitly. The property was a working farm with a reinforced barn, a well, 2 years of preserved supplies, and a perimeter fence that had been upgraded 6 months ago for reasons Petra said were just a feeling. We arrived at 11:40. Petra came out before Fallon had fully stopped, and the reunion between the two sisters was brief and physical and complete, the kind of embrace that communicates everything that would take an hour to say. And then she was already turning to look at the rest of us with the expression of someone rapidly assessing new variables. 7, she said, counting. I prepped for 5. We can work with 7, Fallon said. We can work with 7, Petra agreed. And that was the end of that. The farm had things we hadn't had in the city. Space, separation, silence. The silence was the strangest part. After 24 hours of sirens and radio fragments and the specific acoustics of a building under stress, the absence of urban noise was not peaceful, so much as disorienting. A sensory remove that the mind had to calibrate to before it could use. We each did our own version of that calibration. Theo walked the perimeter fence. Marcus sat on a hay bale in the barn and stared at nothing for 20 minutes, then stood up and asked Petra what needed doing and spent the next 2 hours doing it. Odin found a chair in the farmhouse kitchen and fell asleep in it within minutes. Reed asked if there was somewhere he could be alone. Petra showed him the small room off the north side of the barn. He went in and closed the door. He'd been carrying the weight of Cal since the 3rd-floor bathroom, and some things need a room with a closed door before they can be set down, even temporarily. Casper sat at the kitchen table and drank tea. I sat across from him. There was a long silence that neither of us seemed to need to fill. Outside, Joss was helping Petra with something in the yard. The farm sounds. Chickens, wind. The creak of the barn came through the open window, and they were so thoroughly different from the morning sounds that I felt the distance between those two versions of reality as a physical thing. Did you save anyone? I asked him. In the other city. He wrapped both hands around his mug. 3, he said. I got 3 people to listen, out of however many I tried to warn. A pause. The ones who listened didn't believe me. They just hedged, filed it away. When it started, they had a few extra minutes because of the small things they'd done. He looked at his tea. A few extra minutes is everything. I filled my bathtub, I said. I know. I could tell the way you moved through the morning. People who've done a small thing move differently than people who've done nothing. He looked up. You still think I'm a sad man with a trauma history? I think you're both, I said. I think you know things, and they've cost you. And you keep paying anyway. He didn't contradict this. What do we do now? I asked. The same thing everyone here is going to do. Wait for information. Try to make useful decisions with incomplete data. Try to hold the group together while everyone processes their own version of what happened. He set down the mug. The practical part is simpler than people think. The practical part is just logistics. What breaks people is the part after the logistics, when they have to figure out who they are now that they've done the things they've done. Through the window, I could see Reed emerging from the barn room. He stood in the light for a moment, head up, looking at the sky. "We help him with that part," I said. Casper nodded. "That's all any of us can do for each other." The first week on Petra's farm was not survival in the dramatic sense. It was survival in the logistical, grinding, deeply unglamorous sense. The kind that requires you to subdivide your consciousness between the practical and the unbearable, and to keep moving through both simultaneously. Petra ran a tight rotation. Night watches. 2-hour shifts in pairs, one person at the front gate and one walking the perimeter. Days divided between the garden, the supply management, the radio monitoring, and what Petra called thinking work, which was her term for the group meetings where we tried to build situational awareness from fragmentary information. The radio was our primary window. We had two now. Petra's had been functioning for days, and we'd learned to read its silences as well as its broadcasts. Emergency frequencies painted a picture that was partial but directionally consistent. The outbreak had been most severe in the 6 largest urban districts. Rural areas were affected, but sparsely. The cities were not gone. They were in a process of reconfiguration. The infrastructure partially maintained by people who'd stayed and organized, partially collapsed in the districts where the concentration of infected had become unmanageable. We did not yet know what would come after. Theo had taken to sketching maps from memory and broadcast data. Where the containment zones were, where they were expanding, where they'd held. He would spread them on the kitchen table in the evenings, and the group would gather around them and talk through what they meant with the collaborative seriousness of people who'd found that thinking together was one of the few reliably useful things they could do. Reed contributed more each day, quietly, not dramatically, not announcing it, just incrementally rejoining the group's functioning until one morning I noticed he was the one organizing the supply rotation without being asked, which meant he'd internalized the logic of the place and applied it, which meant he was choosing to still be here in the fullest sense. I found him at the fence one afternoon, watching the road. The road had been empty for 3 days. That was either good news or complicated news, and we hadn't yet determined which. "Are you sleeping?" I asked. "Some," he said. "That's something." He was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking I should have done something different. With Cal, even though I know every version of doing something different ends the same way, I know that. My brain keeps running the alternatives anyway." "The brain builds alternatives because it's trying to protect you from the original decision," I said. "It thinks if it can find a different path, the cost was optional. It can't accept that some costs aren't optional." He turned to look at me. "Did you read that somewhere?" "I made it up just now," I said. "But I think it's true." He turned back to the road. "I think so too." I stayed at the fence with him a while. Behind us, the farm was active. The sound of Joss and Marcus working the garden, Casper and Petra's voices from the kitchen, Odin somewhere playing something quiet on the small hand drum he'd found in a corner of the barn. The sounds of people who were not yet safe but were behaving as though the habits of living were worth maintaining, which was its own form of defiance. Casper came out in the late afternoon and stood with me near the well, watching the clouds. "Someone will come from the city eventually," he said. "Information or people, or both. It'll matter what we know when they do. When, not if." "When," he confirmed. "Cities don't stop. They pause. They contract. They find new configurations. But people are stubborn about the places they built, even when they have every reason not to be." The sun moved. The farm moved in its daily rhythms. Somewhere in the near distance, the world was rebuilding its vocabulary for what had happened. We were already practicing the first sentences. "On the 9th day, they found us," Not the infected. People. A small convoy. 2 trucks and a van. That had come from the southern bypass, following, as it turned out, the same route Fallon had used. The convoy carried 11 more survivors, and among them, improbably, was a physician named Dr. Sable Nkura, who was traveling with enough medical supplies to make Petra's farm something closer to a functioning refuge than a private family shelter. She came through the gate with the particular authority of someone who had been useful in crisis and had decided that usefulness was now her permanent operating mode. Short, perhaps 50, moving fast, eyes doing rapid triage assessment on everything and everyone they landed on. "Anyone requiring immediate medical attention?" she asked the assembled group. Nobody raised a hand. She nodded once, satisfied. "Then we start with inventory." The arrival of 11 people transformed the farm's internal dynamics in ways both positive and complicated. More hands meant more capability. The watch rotation improved. The garden work accelerated. 2 people in the convoy had agricultural experience that Petra immediately put to use. But more people also meant more variables. Different temperaments, different backgrounds, different default responses to stress, different ideas about how decisions should be made and who should make them. The first real conflict came on day 10, over the food supply. A man in the convoy named Garvey, late 40s, former logistics manager, absolutely certain he was the most competent person present in matters of resource management, challenged Petra's supply system on the grounds that it was inefficient. Petra was not wrong in her system. Garvey was not entirely wrong in his critique. The problem was that Garvey's critique arrived with the subtext of wanting to supersede Petra on her own property. And Petra understood that subtext clearly. And the rest of us watched the negotiation of that tension with the wary attention of people who knew that a fracture in group cohesion was as dangerous as anything outside the fence. It was Casper who resolved it, not by mediating the argument directly. He didn't wade into it. He waited until the room had reached its maximum pressure point and then said, very quietly, "The supply system works. There are things about it that could be made more efficient." Both of those statements are true simultaneously. Can we start from there? It was a small thing. It was the exact small thing needed. They built a combined system. Garvey tracked quantities. Petra made distribution decisions. Both worked within the framework the other defined. It was not elegant, and it was not frictionless, and it functioned, which was the only criterion that mattered. Dr. Nkura established a medical corner in the barn's east room. She was thorough and unsentimental, and her presence recalibrated the group's sense of resilience. Not because she could fix everything, but because her systematic attention to the body's vulnerabilities made those vulnerabilities feel manageable rather than threatening. She examined each of us over the course of 3 days. When she got to me, she asked the standard questions: sleeping, eating, pain. And then she paused with her pen over her clipboard and said, "How are you doing with what you saw?" It wasn't a medical question. It was a human one, wearing a medical question's clothes. "I'm still categorizing it," I said. "That's honest." She made a note. "The categorizing takes time. Don't rush it. Just don't mistake the delay for recovery." She looked up. "When it's ready to be processed, it will let you know. Try not to be alone when that happens." I thought about the man on the running board on Route 7. I thought about the lobby of the Arlen. I thought about Casper at the fruit stall, watching the intersection, waiting for the world to confirm what he already knew. "I have people," I said. "Good," she said simply. "That's the most important medical intervention there is." She moved to the next person. Outside the barn window, the farm hummed its small, functional life. 18 people building a temporary world out of whatever the permanent one had left behind. 3 weeks in, the rhythm of the farm had become something we'd built ourselves, collective and specific to us, carrying the fingerprints of all 18 people in its daily structure. Watch rotations, garden shifts, medical rounds. The evening radio sessions where Theo and Odin, and increasingly Garvey, would pool the day's broadcast data and try to construct a coherent picture of what was happening beyond our fence line. The picture was becoming clearer. Not better, clearer. There's a difference. District 7 had established a functioning survivor network that was broadcasting on a community frequency. District 12, which had been one of the worst hit, had gone quiet for a week, and then reopened with a different kind of signal. Organized, regular. The tone of people who had come through something and were beginning to construct what came next. The infected were not disappearing, but they were not infinite either. The outbreak followed the biological logic of contagion, and where the population density dropped below a certain threshold, the spread stalled. Someone would go back to the city eventually. That sentence had been unthinkable 2 weeks ago. Now it was part of the conversation. Casper had been quiet for several days. Not withdrawn. Quiet. Present in the meetings, helpful in the practical work, but internally somewhere else, processing something that he hadn't yet put into words. I found him in the late afternoon sitting on the fence with his canvas bag on his lap, looking east. "You're thinking about the next city," I said. He turned. "There's no next city. This is the only one I know. But eventually, when things stabilize..." "I don't know yet," he said. "For a while, I thought the purpose was to warn people. But you can only warn people who'll do something with the warning. The ones who will, you don't need to convince much. The ones who won't, you can't." He looked at the bag. "Maybe the purpose is just to be someone who stays after." "Stays after what?" "After the thing that changes everything. To be the person who was there, who knows what it actually looked like, who doesn't let the story of it become something neater than it was." His eyes went to the horizon. Every disaster gets simplified in retrospect, made into a lesson, a narrative, a thing with a message. But it wasn't a message. It was just a thing that happened to people who didn't deserve it. And you want to be the person who remembers that. "I want us all to be those people," he said, "not because the remembering saves anyone, but because the accurate record is the only honest thing we can offer what comes next." I sat on the fence beside him. The evening was coming in. That flat, golden hour when farm light is at its most theoretical. Everything touched by it too perfect for what the day actually was. Joss came across the yard and leaned against the fence post below us. She'd cut her hair shorter in the second week, for practical reasons, and it suited her in a way that was exactly wrong for the context, which made it human. "Radio update," she said. "District 9 is actively being organized. Survivor groups coordinating. They're asking for people with skills to come back." Casper looked at me. "Not yet," I said. "No," he agreed, "not yet." But the words, "not yet," were different from the words, "never." And all three of us knew it. And the knowing sat between us on the fence in the evening light with the quality of something that had already been decided, whose announcement was still being timed. Behind us, the farm's evening sounds, the animals settling, the voices from the kitchen where Marcus and Dr. Nkura were building what might become a medical protocol from scratch. Reed calling something to Theo across the yard. Petra's dogs moving through the long grass. 18 people writing a new routine in the space where the old world had been. The city was east. We were west of it, for now. The for now was temporary, and that was finally acceptable. "I keep the list." folded in the inside pocket of the jacket I was wearing when Casper handed it to me at the fruit stall 7 years ago now. Or what feels like 7 years, though the calendar says weeks. The handwriting is neat. The items are ordinary. Water, radio, bag packed, cash. The list of a person who has learned through loss what actually matters. I have thought many times about the version of myself who threw it away, who went to work and cleared the inbox and lived the Tuesday the city had prepared for her, who woke at 2:47 to sirens and had nothing, no water, no plan, no small thing done in advance that bought her the minutes that became everything. I did not save Mirror City. I did not prevent a single death. I filled a bathtub and I listened to a stranger, and I knocked on doors and I drove a bridge, and I sat on a fence and I tried to be honest about what I saw. That is the whole of it. And I have found, sitting with the whole of it, that it is enough to have done the small things when someone told you the large thing was coming. It is enough to have not been alone.